Southern Africa. Late 18th century, golden grasslands ripple beneath endless blue skies. Thunder rumbles far in the distance, as if nature itself anticipates what is to come. Beneath this vast horizon, in a world of tribal tensions and ancient customs, a child was born, a child who would one day shake the earth with his name. But this was no royal birth, no joyous celebration. It began not with pride, but with rejection. His name was Shaka. His mother, Nandi, a fierce and proud woman of the Lungini clan, had fallen in love with Sanzango Kona, a Zulu chief of modest rank, but their union was not bound by official marriage. When Nandi became pregnant, Sanzango Kona's elders, guardians of Zulu custom, condemned her. They mocked her pregnancy, calling it an illness caused by a beetle called a shaka, one that causes abdominal swelling in livestock. In that bitter moment, sarcasm birthed a name, Shaka, a cruel joke that would become a legend. Shunned by both clans, Nandi and her infant son were cast out like exiles. She wandered from village to village, rejected, insulted, hungry. Young Shaka, barely old enough to walk, grew up in the margins of society, barefoot, and bullied. He was seen not as a future warrior, but as a mistake, a shadow. In the Longini household where they found shelter, Shaka was taunted by other boys. Rocks were thrown. Food was withheld. His name Shaka was spat like venom, but Nandi, fierce like a lioness, refused to break. She stood tall, taught her son dignity amid humiliation. "You are not cursed," she told him. "You are fire, and fire shapes the world." And so, in the wilderness of pain, something hardened inside the boy. He became quiet, watchful, but never weak. Every insult became fuel. Every beating became armor. Cut 2. A young Shaka staring silently at the stars, fists clenched, eyes burning. He did not dream of peace or comfort. He dreamed of dominance, of rising so high that the world would never forget his name. He was not born a prince, he was born a wound, but wounds can heal into weapons. This is not the story of a man given power. This is the story of a man who took it. A dusty plain, a boy runs barefoot. Sweat drips from his face. He's chased, not by enemies, but by hunger, shame, and the echoes of laughter from those who mocked him. This is Shaka's childhood, brutal, relentless, without mercy. But then, a shift in fate. Sometime in his early teens, Shaka and his mother Nandi arrived in the lands ruled by the Mthethwa kingdom, under the wise and visionary leadership of Chief Dingiswayo, a ruler unlike any other. Dingiswayo was not merely a chief, he was a reformer, a man of ideas. Where others ruled by tradition, he believed in discipline, structure, and strategy. When he saw Shaka tall, sharpened, and quiet like a predator, he didn't see an outcast, he saw potential. Under Dingiswayo, Shaka was enlisted into the military regiments of the Method. What followed was not just training, it was transformation. Harsh drills, endless running, combat in scorching sun and freezing rain. But for Shaka, pain was familiar. What broke others only sharpened him. He quickly rose above the ranks, not because of privilege, but because of raw excellence. He had the body of a warrior, tall, powerful, commanding, but even more dangerous was his mind. He watched how men moved, how they hesitated, how fear crept into the battlefield. He studied formations, ambushes, and retreats. He didn't just fight, he learned how to win. And Dingiswayo noticed. Soon, Shaka was more than just a soldier, he was a commander, given control of his own regiment. With it, he began experimenting. He saw flaws in the ancient Zulu way of war. Warriors threw spears from afar, hoping for lucky kills. Their formations were loose, their strategy primitive. Shaka rejected all of it. He introduced the Akwa, a short, thick-bladed stabbing spear, designed for brutal close combat. No more running, no more hiding. His warriors were to get close, feel the enemy's breath, and then silence it. He forced his men to abandon sandals, toughening their feet on burning rocks and thorns. He created drills that pushed bodies past exhaustion, not just to build strength, but to kill fear. But his reforms went beyond combat. He observed the art of leadership, how Dingiswayo earned loyalty not just through fear, but through vision. Shaka learned how to command not just men, but their minds. He learned the power of unity and the cost of betrayal. Cut 2. Shaka, kneeling alone at night, sharpening his ikawa by moonlight, whispering to himself, "I will not just survive, I will rise, and they will kneel." Everything Shaka absorbed under Dingiswayo, every lesson, every scar, every strategy, was now forging something new, not a warrior, an empire. Rise to Power 1816, Cinematic Expanded Version. A storm brews over the hills of Zulu land. Thunder cracks. The land is restless. In the year 1816, a change was coming, not just for the Zulu, but for all of southern Africa. News spreads fast. Sanzangakona, chief of the Zulu clan, is dead. Tradition says power should pass to Siguana, Shaka's half-brother, a timid, politically weak man favored by the elders. But tradition had never protected Shaka, and now he would not protect it. With the backing of Dingiswayo and the powerful Methwa military, Shaka makes his move. Scene shift, night, a hut is surrounded. Screams, a blade flashes, Siguana is assassinated. The boy once cast out is now chief of the Zulu people, but what he inherited was no kingdom. The Zulu clan was small, scattered, and politically irrelevant, one of many tribes surviving in the shadow of stronger neighbors. But Shaka did not see he saw what could be. His first order of business, transform the very structure of Zulu society. The old system of elders, councils, and shared rule, abolished. Shaka declared that all power would flow through the chief, through him. Loyalty was no longer earned, it was expected. Any who questioned his rule were eliminated swiftly. Publicly, this was not cruelty for its own sake, it was surgical domination. He was sending a message. The age of tribal fragmentation was over. Cut to Shaka, walking through a gathering of warriors. No one speaks. His eyes scan them like a hawk. They stand taller. They breathe quieter. His presence alone commanded obedience. But Shaka wasn't content to rule just the Zulu. He began to draw warriors from other clans, men he had trained under Dingiswayo. He built a corps of elite fighters who owed him everything. Then came the symbols of power. Regimental crawls, military villages were built, ceremonies were held, displaying unity and force. New laws were passed, centralizing control, organizing territory, and punishing rebellion with unflinching precision. In just months, Shaka had transformed the Zulu clan from a backwater tribe into a rising war machine. And yet, this was only the beginning. The drums of conquest were still silent, but they were coming. Because Shaka knew that to survive in southern Africa's brutal politics, the military revolution, cinematic expanded version, this was Shaka's revolution, not in politics, not in speeches, but in warfare, in the ancient blood-soaked language of Africa. When Shaka seized power, he didn't just become king. Why, he became a military architect, redesigning how his people, and one day, his entire region would fight, conquer, and survive. The spear that changed everything. The Zulus had long used assegais, long, light-throwing spears meant to be hurled from a distance. But Shaka saw a flaw. Distance bred hesitation, and hesitation meant death. He introduced a new weapon, shorter, deadlier, and intimate. The ikwa, named after the sound it made when pulled from a man's chest. Thick blade, close combat. Meant not to frighten, but to finish. This weapon was not for hunting. It was for conquest. Training that broke the body and built the warrior. Shaka abolished sandals. Why? Because a warrior must feel the earth, run faster, hit harder. He trained his men to run 50 miles a day, barefoot, across rocky terrain. If they bled as brothers. If they cried as soldiers. Discipline became religion. Food was rationed. Punishments were brutal, but the results unmatched. Shaka didn't just train fighters. He built machines of war. Men who could outlast, outpace, and outthink every enemy. The buffalo horn formation, Africa's deadliest war tactic. Old battles were chaos, warriors scattered, disorganized, wild. Shaka brought order. He introduced a formation that would terrify southern Africa. The chest, the main force that charged directly into the enemy line. The horns flanking units that curved around the sides, trapping the enemy. The loins, a reserve force behind the chest, waiting to strike at the perfect moment. It was elegant, brutal, efficient. Once surrounded, enemies had no escape. This was no longer war. This was annihilation. A life without distraction. The nation before all to ensure loyalty. Shaka enforced celibacy among his warriors. No marriage, no children, no family ties. Their only love was the Zulu kingdom. Their only father, Shaka, even he, the king himself, never married. He believed personal attachments weaken focus. In his mind, family was vulnerability. The regiments lived in isolated barracks, military cities with strict discipline, like clockwork machines of death and duty. Loyalty was absolute. Disobedience meant death. Victory was not glory, it was expectation. Cut to a ceremony. Young warriors covered in red ochre, chanting in unison, slamming their spears into the earth. The rhythm of a new Zulu order. By 1818, the Zulu were no longer a tribe. They were an army state, forged in fire, led by a man who redefined the meaning of leadership. And now, with his military perfected, expanding the empire, minus 1816 to 1824, Shaka Zulu was no longer just a king. He was a conqueror. The time had come to test the machine he had built. His warriors, trained to perfection. His strategies forged in blood. His ambition, now stretching. Beyond Zulu lands, campaigns of thunder, one by one. Shaka set his sights on the neighboring tribes. But he didn't invade with chaos, he advanced with precision. His army moved swiftly and silently, striking before enemies could even prepare. Villages were surrounded, chiefs were offered surrender or death. Those who resisted were crushed. Those who submitted were absorbed. Shaka wasn't just building an empire, he was building a new people. Captured warriors were not executed, they were given a choice. Join the Zulu ranks, or fall under them. Entire regiments were formed from defeated enemies. These new warriors were retrained, re-educated, and given a new identity. There were no longer many tribes. There was only one nation. Zulu, language, dress, and rituals were standardized. Tribal distinctions were erased. Unity through domination. The shadow of Zuide, but not everyone bowed. There was one rival too powerful to ignore. Zuide Kalanga, king of the Ndiwando, a ruthless, ambitious warlord who saw Shaka's rise as a threat. The stage was set for one of Southern Africa's greatest rivalries. Zuide commanded a vast kingdom with experienced warriors. He had spies, alliances, and hatred in his heart. Two lions now roamed the same territory. Only one would survive. The Battle of Gcoc Coakley Hill, minus 1818, outnumbered, surrounded, but never unprepared. Zuide's forces closed in, confident of victory. But Shaka chose the high ground, Gcoc Hill, and turned it into a trap. He positioned his troops carefully. The chest absorbed the attack. The horns waited in silence. The loins prepared to strike. For hours, they clashed. Spears clanged, bodies fell. Blood painted the hill red. Then, as Zuide's forces pushed forward, Shaka's horns curled in from the flanks, surrounding them. The trap was sprung. Zuide's army was shattered, not just defeated, but humiliated. The message was clear. You cannot outsmart the master of war. The final blow, the Battle of Malatu's River, 1822 years later, Shaka delivered the killing stroke. Zuide's final stand came at the Malatu's River. He was forced into a retreat. As his warriors tried to cross, Shaka's regiments attacked. Midstream, slicing through their ranks like lions through cattle, the Ndwan kingdom collapsed. Zuide fled a king without a crown. His empire turned to ash. Wide aerial shot, smoking villages, shattered shields, silence over the battlefield. The ripple of conquest, but Shaka didn't stop there. His victory sent shockwaves across southern Africa. Entire clans fled north, fearing Zulu vengeance. A refugee crisis began, known later as the Mafeking or the Crushing. The Zulu had triggered a continental earthquake, and through it all, Shaka marched forward, undefeated, unstoppable, unchallenged. His empire now stretched farther than any Zulu king had ever dreamed. But power is a flame, in flames, when unchecked, burn everything. The Mafeking, the crushing 1820s. This was Mafeking, a Zulu word meaning the crushing, not just a war, not just a migration, but a continental storm, set in motion by Shaka Zulu's meteoric rise. He did not plan it, he did not seek it, but his empire caused it. the empire that moved the earth after the fall of Zihide and the Nendwan kingdom, a vacuum opened. Neighboring tribes, once stable, now stood exposed, afraid of becoming the next Zulu target. They didn't wait, they ran. Thousands fled north, west, and east. Clans split apart. Kingdoms collapsed. Entire regions were depopulated. The land-cried tribes scrambled for safety, but in doing so, they crashed into other tribes. Violence followed. Famine crept in. The dominoes fell. This chain reaction wasn't local. It reached into what is today Zimbabwe, Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, Malawi, and even the Congo Basin. New kingdoms born from fire in this chaos. New leaders emerged, many of them trained by Shaka himself. Among them, Mzilikazi, one of Shaka's most brilliant generals. A man of ambition, Mzilikazi broke away, leading his own followers northward. He carved out an empire in present-day Zimbabwe, founding the Ndebele Kingdom, a powerful military state modeled directly on Shaka's system. Others did the same. Warriors who had tasted Zulu discipline took that fire and spread it across the continent. Shaka had not only built an empire, he had built a new warrior culture, replicated and modified across southern Africa. A time of blood and survival, but not all stories were of triumph. For many, the Mafeking was apocalyptic. Families were separated. Crops were abandoned. Rivers ran red with the blood of refugees and resistors alike. A time when children grew up knowing only flight. A time when chiefs made alliances with enemies just to survive one more moon. Southern Africa became a chessboard soaked in blood. And at the center of it all, like the eye of a hurricane, stood Shaka. He did not rejoice in the chaos, but he did not stop it either. In his mind, the weak were swept away. And from their ashes, a new Africa would be born. One built on strength. One led by Zulu power. Peak of power, 1824 to 1827, he was no longer just a king. He was a storm wearing human skin. By the mid-1820s, Shaka Zulu had become more than a man. He was a legend in motion, feared by kings, studied by enemies, and worshipped by those who served him. His empire stretched farther than any Zulu leader had ever dreamed. From the Indian Ocean coast to the distant mountain ranges, from fertile plains to war-scarred valleys, Shaka ruled it all. A nation of warriors. At the heart of his rule was an army unlike any Africa had ever seen. Over 40,000 warriors trained, like machines, running barefoot across thorns and stone without flinching. Each man belonged to a regiment, called an impi, and lived in military barracks like a monk in a war temple. Their purpose, serve the king. Their motto, victory or death. Marriage was forbidden. Personal wealth, irrelevant. Your identity was the Zulu. Shaka's capital, Bulawayo, meaning place of the one to be slain, stood as a terrifying symbol. It wasn't just a city, it was a war factory, built for power, precision, and punishment. Absolute control, power changed. Shaka, and he knew it. Every chief in his empire was appointed by him. No bloodline, no inheritance, no tradition mattered more than his word. He created a system of spies, operatives who reported directly to him. Their task, uncover disloyalty, silence resistance, and protect the throne. Even at the height of his strength, Shaka trusted few. He believed weakness was contagious, and loyalty had to be constantly tested. Punishment for disobedience was swift and public. Beatings, executions, entire families wiped from memory. And yet, his people obeyed not only from fear, but from awe. Because under Shaka's rule, the Zulu were safe. Their enemies vanished. Their borders expanded. Their name commanded respect. First contact with the outside world in 1824. Something unexpected happened. White sails appeared on the eastern horizon. European traders, mostly British and Portuguese, came seeking ivory, furs, and trading rights. But when they met Shaka, they realized they weren't dealing with a tribal chief. They were in the presence of a ruler, a tactician, a king. He welcomed the foreigners cautiously, intrigued by their weapons, their tools, their strange customs. In return, they were stunned by what they saw. A black African king who had built a disciplined empire with no outside help, no guns, no cannons, no European interference. Shaka allowed them to settle at Port Natal modern-day Durban, not as equals, but as subjects under his gaze. He understood the future was changing, and though he ruled through the spear, he now watched the world with curiosity and calculation. The price of glory, but this power came with a cost. The bigger the empire, the heavier the crown. As his military machine grew, so did the pressure to control it. More enemies lurked, more conspiracies brewed, and Shaka, once a bold warrior, began transforming into something else, a ruler consumed by the weight of his own legend. The line between discipline and cruelty began to blur. He ruled absolutely, but now, fear was beginning to spread, not just through his enemies, but within his own court. The death of Nandi and descent into madness in 1827. Tragedy struck the heart of the Zulu Empire. Nandi Kabheb, Shaka's mother, the only person he had ever loved unconditionally, fell ill. She was more than a parent. She was his shield, his flame, his soul. She had defended him as a child when the world rejected him. And now, as death approached, she was slipping beyond his reach. When Nandi died, a part of Shaka died with her. A king unraveling Shaka's grief was not silent. It was explosive. He did not mourn like an ordinary man. He mourned like a god whose world had shattered. He ordered a full year of mourning across the Zulu kingdom. But this was no ordinary mourning. No crops could be planted. Even in the face of starvation, no milk was to be consumed. A vital staple was now forbidden. No laughter, no music, no joy. Pregnant women were slaughtered, accused of disrespecting the Queen Mother's memory by creating life while she had just lost hers. Thousands were executed for mourning incorrectly. Villages burned. Fathers buried sons. Sons buried fathers. Fear replaces loyalty. The warrior king, who once inspired awe, was now feared as a mad god. His commanders, once proud to serve him, began to whisper in secret. His closest advisors walked on eggshells, terrified that a wrong word could mean death. Even Mabopa, his trusted bodyguard, began watching his king with wary eyes. Shaka no longer trusted anyone. Paranoia took root. He believed that betrayal lurked in every corner, even among his family. He would test loyalty with brutal games, sending warriors to die in needless missions, just to see who would question him. He was cracking, not in battle, but within his own mind. The empire begins to fracture as his wrath spread across the kingdom. The once mighty Zulu machine began to stutter. Trade slowed. Starvation crept into the villages. Morale among warriors plummeted. Allies began to pull away. Shaka had built an empire on discipline and fear, but now the fear was directionless, turning inward. Enemies didn't need to attack. Shaka's rage was burning the empire from the inside out. And somewhere, in the silence of the night, his half-brothers Dingan and Mylangina watched, waited, and planned. And Mylangina watched, waited, and planned. Assassination 1828. The king who made Africa tremble fell not to an army, but to betrayal within his own bloodline. The year was 1828. The Zulu Empire stood vast and powerful. But behind the grandeur, Shaka was unraveling. His paranoia had become a plague. His rage knew no limits. And his people, the same warriors who once worshipped his name, now whispered his downfall in the dark. The death of Nandi had left a wound in his soul. And like a wounded lion, Shaka had turned savage, unpredictable, and bloodthirsty. But empires don't only fall by sword, they fall by silence. By whispers, by betrayal. The plot begins in the royal kraal of Quatakuza. Two half-brothers, Dingan and Mylangina, watched with quiet fury. They had seen enough blood, enough madness, enough of Shaka's reign. To them, the mighty Zulu Empire could no longer survive under the shadow of a king gone mad. They sought allies in secret. Among them was Mabopa, Shaka's trusted bodyguard, a man who had once sworn to protect him with his life. But Mabopa too had changed. He had witnessed too much cruelty, too many killings in the name of grief. His loyalty had withered into fear, and fear, in time, became resolve. The final day, September 22nd, 1828. The sun rose like any other over Quatakuza. Unaware it would set on Shaka's final day. That evening, as the king walked through his kraal, unguarded, unarmored, his fate closed in. Behind him, footsteps, no fanfare, no battle drums, just three shadows moving like ghosts. Dingan, Mylangina, Mabopa. With swift and silent coordination, they surrounded him. Shaka turned and saw the end. He barely had time to speak. Steel flashed. Blood spilled. The king fell. Not in the battlefield, not at the head of an army, but in the dust of his own courtyard, betrayed by those he once called family. Underscore the unmarked grave. There was no royal funeral, no songs of mourning, no memorial of stone. Shaka's body was buried in secret, in an unmarked grave, its location lost to history. The man who had commanded tens of thousands was now swallowed by silence. A legend erased by blood. Underscore the aftershock. With Shaka gone, Dingan seized the throne. But the kingdom he inherited was no longer whole. The terror Shaka left behind lingered. The loyalty he commanded could not be rebuilt. And across Africa, the name Shaka was no longer just a king's name. It became a warning, a myth, a symbol. Legacy: you can kill a man, but not his name. Shaka Zulu is gone. No royal tomb, no crown left behind. Just echoes, echoing louder than any army ever could. More than a king, he became a force. More than a warrior, he became a symbol. Underscore, a continent changed before Shaka. Southern Africa was a fragmented land of scattered tribes, proud but divided. After Shaka, it stood transformed, centralized, militarized, and forever altered. He forged unity out of chaos, turning a small, overlooked clan into the dominant empire of its age. Military academies around the world still study his tactics, his buffalo horns formation, his revolution of close combat warfare, his redefinition of loyalty, discipline, and command. But his legacy is not just found in tactics. It is carved into the very soil of Africa. Controversial, complex, unforgettable, Shaka's name sparks debate to this day. To some, he was a tyrant, a brutal ruler who shed too much blood. To others, he was a liberator, a genius who rose from nothing to claim greatness. But no one calls him weak. No one calls him forgettable. He was ruthless, yes, but he was necessary. In a world on the brink of colonial conquest, Shaka showed the world that Africa could lead itself, govern itself, and defend itself fiercely and fearlessly. Underscore, echoes through time. Shaka's influence outlived him. The Zulu nation survived long after his death. Kings like Sechueo carried his banner into battle against the British Empire. In the wars of resistance, in the chants of warriors, in the rhythms of the people, Shaka's spirit marched on. Even today, in the heart of South Africa, monuments rise. Children learn his name, elders tell his story. And across Africa, he is remembered not just as a man, but as a movement. Underscore the final frame visual. A lone spear stands in the earth as the sun sets behind the hills of KwaZulu. The wind carries whispers. Shaka, Shaka, Shaka. He was born in shame. He rose in fire. He ruled in thunder. He fell in silence. But he is remembered in eternity. Underscore Shaka Zulu, the warrior king who changed Africa forever.